So we are here today with George Kudak, who currently serves as a consultant for Dairy One's DHI Records and Field Services. George recently retired and served as the director of Dairy One's DHI and Field Services for over 20 years, for a number of years, I should say. He has over 20 years of experience with DHI Records. He was a former president of the National Dairy Herd Information Association, and most importantly, he was a dairyman for over 23 years. So thanks for joining us, George.
You're welcome, Molly.
All right. So you obviously have a lot of experience in the dairy industry, specifically with DHI and records. So today we were hoping you could talk to us a little bit about milk pregnancy and what role milk pregnancy should play in deciding whether or not to dry a cow off early.
Okay, well, there's a number of things that should be considered when that question comes up. But first and foremost, if somebody is going to decide to reduce their production by virtue of drying cows off earlier than their intended date, the first thing they need to do is actually to make sure that the cow's pregnant. Even as a general rule, people drying off cows need that piece of information because of the cost associated with stopping a cow from producing milk, putting her dry, and then feeding her for quite a number of days, and then have no return on that cow. So I view this as really a list of 5 things a producer should know. And the first thing, as we mentioned, is she still pregnant, and what's the due date? From there, once we determine that she is still a pregnant cow and not open, we can deal with that cow. And the way we deal with it is we expand our work list. And a typical work list is a dry-off list. And most dry-off lists today are targeted somewhere between 45 and 60 days for a rest period for cows to stop milking and to stand in the dry pen. So we can do this a number of ways. We can change the typical day since last heat of 180 days that we use as a target for making a list, because herds don't test every 30 days necessarily. So it gives us some leeway. So if you're going to dry a cow off and rest her for 60 days, and you do the math of 280 days gestation minus 60, that means you want the cow dry by day 220. And at day 220, we can limit that to going to 180 days, figuring every 40 days, and give us some leeway. So a simple method on the work list is to just change that to 150 days or even 120 days, or simply delete that criteria and just say, give me a list of all cows that have been determined pregnant with their due date. And of course, then this third thing that's important is to sort that list by the due date. And then a couple of things that you ought to know about the cow before you make this decision. First of all, you need to know what her milk production is. Some cows are maybe better candidates than others. You also should know what their components are, and the somatic cell, because we are living in a world where some people choose to selectively dry treat cows. So knowing that history of somatic cell and our current somatic cell leads us to making the right decisions. And then lastly, and it's something we don't necessarily collect in the DHI world, but they need to review and look at that cow's tendency of gaining weight. They need to look at body condition, because cows that are overly conditioned at an additional 30 days before dry off is just going to compound a problem of the cow becoming overweight and having problems with the transition period. So I just want to go back and to talk a little bit about why we go step 1, knowing that she's still pregnant. The fact of the matter is that somewhere between conception and calving, we lose about 25% of the pregnancies. Now, most of those happen at the earlier stages, but we still see cows, and a lot of producers are surprised by cows that stand in the dry cow pens and end up being open. So these missed heats, they could be cows that are anestrus. And the worst thing is if you dry the cow off and you have no income, and now you're married to the idea of feeding that cow for an additional 60 days minimum, and then possibly another 14 days before you notice that she's on your list of overdue dry cows before you actually intervene, And by that time, we've got a costly candidate sitting there eating feed, giving us nothing in return. And we should really know that right up front. By the way, the cost of that is somewhere around $200. So if we miss a cow and we dry her off and she goes into the dry cow pen and we continue to feed her, we're going to lose about $200 on that particular cow. So the last thing I just want to say is that choices need to be made. Number one, we talked about if the cow comes back pregnant. But what if she comes back open? What do we do? Well, certainly the most logical thing to do, depending on the production, is we can milk her. And if we continue to milk the cow, that's fine. But she also may be a cow, depending again on components, milk production, and somatic cell counts. She may be a candidate to move to a different list called the cull list. So I think that really wraps up why people need to know if that cow is pregnant before they make the move to dry cows off early to reduce production under the current market conditions.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And it sounds like there was a lot of good information in there. Obviously, we offer milk pregnancy testing through DHI samples, but we also offer the strip samples that people can send in through a diagnostic kit. But it sounds like there's a lot of other really good information from that milk sample that you're gonna need to consider before you start drying cows off. So might be good to add it onto your DHI sample versus the kit.
Yeah, we got to remember that little 2 milliliter vial is nothing but information in liquid form. So
Absolutely.
Knowing that information makes us know that our decisions are the best that we can make.
Absolutely. And that leads us into the next point. So we recently at Dairy One developed a new platform to answer people's questions if they would like some additional assistance with going through their data. So that's data-driven at dairyone.com, and people can send in their questions there and get a little bit of help diving deeper into their data and getting the information that they need out of that to make better decisions. So that's a really great way for people to get some extra information.
Yeah, not only that, I love talking to dairy producers and helping them figure out how to use the data to make decisions on their farm.
Absolutely. So if you want to talk to George, he'd love to talk to you. So send him an email right there and we'll get you in touch. Well, thank you so much, George. We really appreciate your insights on this.